The Godfather stands as the crowning jewel of cinema, a masterpiece that redefined storytelling and etched the Corleone family into the bedrock of history. It taught us about power, loyalty, and the heavy price of business. Yet the shadows cast by this cinematic giant hid a much darker reality for its legendary ensemble. Behind the tuxedos and the power plays were lives riddled with personal tragedies, financial ruin, and devastating diseases. It seems the curse of the Corleones bled into the real world, claiming the lives of its brightest stars in ways that broke our hearts. This is the tragic final chapter of the actors who made The Godfather immortal, but paid a heavy price in life, dying leaving us with only their legendary performances and a deep sense of loss. Marlon Brando accepted the offer in 1972 as Don Vito Corleone when he was 48 years old, a fallen titan who resurrected his career to play the Godfather, only to watch his own real-life family dynasty crumble into murder, suicide, and madness. At the time of casting, Brando was considered box office poison, forcing him to accept a humiliatingly low upfront fee of just $50,000 to secure the role, a shocking pittance for a former Oscar winner. However, his genius lay in negotiating a back-end percentage that eventually netted him over $2 million as the film shattered records of fortune he would frantically burn through in later years. Behind the stoic mask of the Don Brando's life was a Shakespearean tragedy of neglect and chaos. He watched his son Christian go to prison for murder and his daughter Cheyenne hang herself in Tahiti calamities that drove him into a spiral of gluttony and reclusive eccentricity. He died on July 1, 2004, at age 80 from pulmonary fibrosis, leaving an estate valued at nearly $21 million, but he died a broken man haunted by the realization that while he could control the underworld on screen, he was utterly powerless to save his own children from the demons he helped create. Fun fact, Brando wanted the Don to look like a bulldog, so during the audition, he stuffed cotton balls into his cheeks. For the actual filming, a dentist created a custom mouthpiece to maintain that iconic drooping jawline. Brando was the father who couldn't save his family, but his on-screen eldest son was played by a man whose explosive temper was matched only by the crushing grief that nearly destroyed his career. Next is the hothead who famously paid a physical price for his role. James Caan exploded onto the screen in 1972 as Sonny Corleone when he was 32 years old. The volatile heir whose brutal on-screen assassination became cinema legend, masking a real-life period of darkness where he vanished into the abyss of addiction. Caan was paid a mere $35,000 for his work in The Godfather, a staggering contrast to the stardom the film brought him, yet this low pay was the admission price to a career that would later command millions. However, the invincibility of Sonny Corleone did not extend to James Caan. Following the tragic death of his beloved sister from leukemia in the early 1980s, Caan spiraled into a deep depression and a devastating cocaine addiction that derailed his career for years, a period he referred to as just lost time. He lost his fortune, his home, and his reputation, forcing him to claw his way back from the bottom in his later years. He passed away on July 6, 2022 at age 82 from a heart attack and coronary artery disease, leaving behind an estate estimated at $20 million and a legacy of raw masculine vulnerability. Fun fact: for the role of Sonny, Caan wore terrified dental implants to build up his jaw and create a more animalistic, aggressive look, which actually changed the shape of his face and speech pattern during filming. Sonny was the fire of the family, but the Corleone home required a silent, stabilizing force. Our next subject was a jazz legend who took on a role of silence, hiding a personal history of traumatic loss that mirrored the stoicism she displayed on screen. Morgana King sat at the wedding table in 1972 as Mama Corleone when she was 42 years old. A celebrated songstress who played the silent matriarch while harboring the scars of a horrific accident and the grief of a widow. Though she had only a few lines in the film, King was actually a world-renowned jazz singer with a 4-octave range, creating a jarring contrast between her voiceless character and her real-life vocal power. Her salary for the film was a standard Screen Actors Guild weekly rate, likely totaling less than $10,000, a humble sum for a woman who filled concert halls. Her life was marked by a devastating car accident in the 1950s that kept her hospitalized for months and nearly ended her career, followed by the premature death of her husband, jazz trumpeter Tony Frascella, which left her a young widow. She faded into obscurity in her later years, living a reclusive life in Palm Springs, until she died on March 27, 2018 at age 87 from non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Her death went unreported for months, a quiet finale for a woman who was once the mother of the most powerful family in film history. Fun fact: despite playing a traditional Italian mother, King was only 10 years older than Al Pacino and James Caan, forcing the makeup department to use old-age stipple to age her convincingly. Mama Corleone held the family together, but the family business relied on the loyalty of its captains. Next is the man who uttered the movie's most famous improvised line, but whose real-life ego and stubbornness cost him a place in cinematic history. Richard S. Castellano danced at the wedding in 1972 as Peter Clemenza when he was 39 years old, the jovial enforcer who taught us to take the cannoli, but whose tragic misunderstanding of his own worth led to his erasure from the sequel and a premature death. Castellano was actually the highest-paid actor in the film, alongside Brando and Pacino, initially earning a reported $50,000 plus allowances, reflecting his status as a rising Broadway star. However, his success became his undoing. When The Godfather Part 2 was greenlit, Castellano demanded a massive salary increase and fatally dialogue approval for his character. The studio refused, simply writing Clemenza out of the script and replacing him with Frank Pentangeli. This miscalculation stalled his momentum, and he struggled with typecasting and severe health issues related to his weight. He died of a heart attack on December 10, 1988, at the shockingly young age of 55, leaving a modest estate of under $1 million. He remains a cautionary tale of how quickly Hollywood can replace you if you blink during a negotiation. Fun fact: the iconic line, "Leave the gun, take the cannoli," was not in the original script. Castellano improvised the second half based on a suggestion from his wife, creating cinema history on the fly. Clemenza was the loyal soldier, but every empire has a traitor. Our next subject played the man who betrayed the Don, but in real life, he was the victim of a relentless media joke that declared him dead 30 years before his heart actually stopped beating. Abbe Vigoda walked into the trap in 1972 as Sal Tessio when he was 51 years old, a struggling stage actor who found immortality as the traitor, only to spend decades fighting a bizarre public perception that he was already a ghost. Before The Godfather, Vigoda was a virtual unknown, earning inconsistent theater wages. For his role as Tessio, he was paid the scale rate of approximately $2,000 per week, a tiny investment for a performance that defined betrayal. However, his life became a surreal psychological battle in 1982 when People magazine mistakenly published reports of his death. For the next 34 years, Vigoda had to constantly remind the world he was alive, becoming a walking punchline on talk shows while privately enduring the loneliness of being treated like a relic. He finally passed away for real on January 26, 2016 at the age of 94 from natural causes, leaving an estate of $10 million, proving he had the last laugh. Fun fact: Vigoda landed the role of Tessio not because of an agent, but because he attended an open call without an appointment, and Francis Ford Coppola liked him specifically because he looked tired and physically exhausted. Tessio was a man of calculation, but the Corleone family also employed monsters of pure brute force. Next is the real-life wrestling giant, who was so nervous acting opposite Brando that his genuine stutter made it into the final cut. Lenny Montana crashed into the cinematic world in 1972 as Luca Brasi when he was 46 years old, a real-life wrestling giant whose terrifying on-screen presence masked a gentle, nervous soul that was paid pennies to create a legend. Before he was the Don's most feared enforcer, Montana was a professional wrestler known as the Zebra Kid, grappling for cash in smoky arenas. For his role in The Godfather, which required him to loom over the cast with silent menace, he was paid a standard daily rate that amounted to less than $1,000 for his week of work, a microscopic sum compared to the millions the film grossed. While his character was a cold-blooded killer, Montana was actually deeply insecure about his acting abilities, trembling so visibly during scenes with Marlon Brando that he flubbed his lines repeatedly. He parlayed this role into a career of playing tough guys, accumulating a modest net worth of approximately $500 in dollars, but he remained a working-class hero rather than a wealthy star. His life ended not in a hail of bullets, but in the quiet grip of heart failure. He died on May 12, 1992, at the age of 66, sitting in the passenger seat of a car in Italy, far removed from the violent underworld he immortalized. Fun fact: the scene where Luca Brasi nervously rehearses his speech to the Don was not in the script. Coppola filmed Montana practicing because he was genuinely terrified of acting opposite Brando, and the director loved the authenticity of his fear. Luca Brasi was the muscle, but the true threat to the Corleone empire came from a man with a mind for business and eyes cold enough to freeze hell. Next is the actor who played the drug kingpin, a rising star whose life was extinguished just as he reached the summit of his fame. Al Lettieri locked eyes with the camera in 1972 as Virgil the Turk Sollozzo when he was 44 years old, the chilling antagonist who set the entire tragedy in motion, only to be struck down by a real-life curse of premature death just as Hollywood opened its doors. Lettieri possessed a face carved out of granite and a menacing charisma that terrified audiences. Despite his pivotal role as the man who shoots Don Corleone, Lettieri was still a supporting character actor at the time, earning a salary estimated at $15,000 for the film, a fraction of what his co-stars commanded. He was on the verge of superstardom, securing major roles in The Getaway and Mr. Majestic immediately after, poised to become the villain of the decade. However, the tragedy of Al Lettieri is one of stolen time. Just 3 years after The Godfather, at the peak of his physical and professional power, he suffered a massive heart attack and died on October 18, 1975, at the shockingly young age of 47. He left behind a net worth of less than $500,000, dying before he could cash in on the massive checks that were finally coming his way. Fun fact: Lettieri was the only cast member who actually spoke fluent Italian, and he spent hours on set coaching Marlon Brando on his pronunciation, helping the mumbled lines of the Don sound authentic. Sollozzo pulled the trigger, but he needed protection from the law to do it. Our next subject played the crooked police captain, a towering figure of corruption who hated the very industry that made him famous. Sterling Hayden slammed his fist on the table in 1972 as Captain McCluskey when he was 56 years old, a reluctant Hollywood icon who played the corrupt cop with seething intensity, driven by a deep self-loathing and a desperate need to pay off crippling debts to the IRS. Hayden was a legitimate war hero and a leading man in the 1950s, but by the 70s, he was a broken man living on a barge in Paris, despised for testifying against his friends during the McCarthy-era Red Scare. He accepted the role in The Godfather solely for the money, negotiating a flat fee of roughly $25,000 to clear his back taxes, openly calling acting a humiliating way to earn a living. The anger you see in McCluskey's eyes was real. It was the rage of a man who felt he had sold his soul. Despite earning millions over his career, he spent it all on boats, alcohol, and travel, dying with a liquid net worth of barely $1 million. He passed away on May 23, 1986, at age 70 from prostate cancer, a man who conquered the seas but drowned in his own guilt. Fun fact: Hayden was an OSS agent during World War II who ran guns through enemy lines to Yugoslav partisans and even parachuted into Croatia, making him the only cast member who had actually killed men in real-life combat. McCluskey represented the dirty streets of New York, but the Corleones' reach extended to the glitz of the West Coast. Next is the man who embodied Hollywood decadence, a producer whose scream of terror became one of the most famous sounds in cinema history. John Marley woke up screaming in 1972 as Jack Woltz when he was 65 years old, the arrogant movie mogul who learned the hard way that you never say no to the family facing a gruesome wake-up call that mirrored his own failing health. Marley was a seasoned veteran of the stage and screen, winning the Volpe Cup at Venice years prior, yet for The Godfather, he was paid a standard supporting rate of approximately $10,000. He brought a sense of patrician arrogance to the role, representing the old guard of Hollywood that the new era was violently dismantling. However, while Woltz feared for his prize racehorse, Marley feared for his heart. He underwent open-heart surgery shortly after the film's release, a procedure that shadowed his final years with fragility. He died on May 22, 1984, at the age of 76, following complications from a subsequent cardiac surgery, leaving an estate estimated at $1.5 million. He remains immortalized in a bed of satin and blood, the face of Hollywood's ultimate punishment. Fun fact: in the rehearsals for the horsehead scene, the crew used a fake prop, but for the final take, Coppola secretly swapped it for a real severed horsehead obtained from a dog food factory. Marley's scream of absolute horror was completely genuine. Woltz refused to cast a fading singer, a character whose desperation for fame mirrored the man playing him. Our next subject was a crooner who didn't just play a man with mob connections. He lived in their shadow, owing his entire career to the real-life godfathers who pulled the strings. Al Martino pleaded for a part in 1972 as Johnny Fontaine when he was 45 years old, a golden-voiced heartthrob whose on-screen relationship with the Don was a chilling reflection of his own servitude to the Philadelphia crime families. Martino was a chart-topping singer in the 50s, but his career was hijacked by mobsters who demanded protection money. When he refused, he was beaten and exiled to England for years. He returned to play Fontaine, not for the money, accepting a minimal Screen Actors Guild scale of roughly $5,000, but because he believed the role would save his career. Ironically, he allegedly used his real-life Godfather mob boss Russ Bufalino to pressure Coppola into giving him the part, blurring the lines between script and reality. Martino lived a long life of luxury, amassing a net worth of $10 million thanks to his music, but he could never escape the whisper that he was merely a puppet for powerful men. He died on October 13, 2009, at age 82 from a heart attack, the man who sang at the wedding finally taking his last bow. Fun fact: Martino had no acting experience prior to the film, and during the scene where the Don slaps him, Marlon Brando hit him so hard and unexpectedly that Martino didn't know how to react, creating the pathetic whimpering look that made the final cut. Johnny Fontaine was the soft face of the business, but the Corleones were about to expand into the desert where softness gets you killed. Next is the man who built Las Vegas, a character with a visionary mind and a short temper who would receive a very literal bullet to the eye for his disrespect. Alex Rocco swaggered into the desert in 1972 as Mo Green when he was 36 years old, a former real-life Boston thug who channeled his violent past into a legendary performance only to find that Hollywood fame paid less than street crime. Rocco was a former associate of the infamous Winter Hill Gang who fled to LA to escape a murder charge, stumbling into acting as a survival tactic. For his iconic role as the man who slapped the Don, he was paid a mere Screen Actors Guild weekly scale, netting him approximately $500 for his time on set, a laughable sum for a character whose bullet through the eyeglasses death scene became one of cinema's most enduring images. He spent decades as a working character actor, amassing a net worth of roughly $3 million, but never achieving the A-list status his charisma promised. His voice was gravel, his presence was electric, but his body eventually betrayed him. Rocco passed away on July 18, 2015 at the age of 79, after a long, painful battle with pancreatic cancer, a quiet end for a man who had survived gang wars and Hollywood sharks. Fun fact: Rocco was never supposed to be in the movie. He badgered Francis Ford Coppola relentlessly, finally winning the role by claiming, "I'm from Boston, I know how to kill people," a claim that was terrifyingly true. Mo Green was a loudmouth who built a city, but the man who ordered his death was a picture of elegant malice. Next is a fading film noir legend who played the ultimate puppet master, unaware that his own heart was ticking down its final beats. Richard Conte plotted the fall of the Corleones in 1972 as Don Emilio Barzini when he was 62 years old, a once-celebrated noir idol whose role as the mastermind villain was a final desperate grasp at glory before his sudden lonely demise. In the 1940s and 50s, Conte was a major studio star, but by the 70s, his career had evaporated, leaving him to accept the role of Barzini for a flat fee estimated at $15,000, a humiliating paycheck for a man who once carried entire films. He poured his remaining vitality into the character, creating a villain of sophisticated evil, hoping for a career renaissance that never came. The tragedy of Richard Conte is one of abrupt silence. Just 3 years after the film's release, he suffered a massive heart attack followed by a stroke on April 15, 1975. He died at the age of 65, leaving behind a modest estate of less than $500,000, and a legacy of playing men who thought they controlled fate only to be crushed by it. Fun fact, Conte was actually considered for the role of Don Vito Corleone before Brando was cast, and he campaigned hard for it, bitter that he was relegated to the antagonist role instead of the lead he felt he deserved. Barzini pulled the strings, but he needed allies to encircle the Corleones. Our next subject was a veteran actor who shared a deep forgotten history with Marlon Brando, starting from the very streets where they both learned to act. Rudy Bond sat at the commission table in 1972 as Don Cuneo when he was 60 years old, a working-class actor whose face was etched with the struggle of the New York stage, playing a boss while living the life of a pauper compared to the stars he sat opposite. Bond was a contemporary of Brando from the Actors Studio, having appeared with him in the original stage production of A Streetcar Named Desire, yet their paths diverged sharply. While Brando became a god, Bond remained a grinder. For his appearance as the head of the Cuneo family, he received the standard scale pay of roughly $1,000 a week, a bitter reminder of the financial gap between the Don and his rivals. He lived a life of quiet anonymity, a reliable face in the background of classic films, never accumulating significant wealth. His death was as understated as his career. He passed away PN March 29, 1982 at the age of 69 from complications of a stroke, leaving behind a legacy of endurance in an industry that celebrates only the exceptional. Fun fact, Bond wrote a memoir titled I Rode a Streetcar, Named Desire, detailing the wild early days of method acting, where he witnessed the raw, unpolished genius of a young Marlon Brando before the world knew his name. Cuneo was a rival Don, but the Tattaglia family was the spark that lit the fuse. Next is a man whose nimble fingers were more dangerous than a gun, a real-life card shark who hustled his way into cinema history. Tony Giorgio sneered at the camera in 1972 as Bruno Tattaglia when he was 49 years old, a legitimate magician and grifter whose brief violent screen time belied a lifetime spent mastering the art of deception. Giorgio was not a traditional actor. He was a sleight-of-hand artist and a card manipulator who often consulted for casinos on cheating. His role in The Godfather paid him the standard day player rate of a few $100s that barely covered his expenses. Yet, it immortalized his sharp, predatory face. Unlike the mobsters, he played Giorgio's life was about control and illusion, but he couldn't trick his own biology. He struggled with severe respiratory and heart issues in his later years, living humbly with a net worth estimated under $500 sous and dollars. He died on February 1, 2012, at the age of 88 from heart failure, a man who knew every trick in the book, but ultimately had to fold his hand. Fun fact, Giorgio's hands were arguably more famous than his face. He was the go-to hand double for Hollywood stars whenever a script called for expert card shuffling or magic tricks, lending his dexterity to actors who couldn't fan a deck to save their lives. Al Neri shut the door on Kay Adams, but there was another wife who suffered in the Corleone orbit. Next is the woman who played Sonny's wife, a stage veteran whose on-screen hysteria masked a real-life battle against a silent, creeping illness. Julie Gregg screamed in denial in 1972 as Sandra Corleone when she was 35 years old, a Tony-nominated actress whose portrayal of the long-suffering mob wife captured the terrifying vulnerability of women in that violent world. Gregg was a star of the stage, having earned acclaim for The Happy Time, but in the male-dominated world of The Godfather, she was a supporting player, paid the minimum guild rate of roughly $1,500 for her week of shooting. Despite her immense talent and a promising start, her film career never exploded as expected, and she spent decades as a working actress in television, building a modest estate of $1 million. Her personal narrative turned tragic in her later years as she waged a long private war against cancer. She died on November 7, 2016, at the age of 79 at her home in Van Nuys, fading away quietly while the film that made her famous continued to roar through history. Fun fact, Gregg was originally a serious contender for the role of Kay Adams, but Coppola felt she possessed a more ethnic intensity that was better suited for the passionate, tragic wife of Sonny Corleone. Sandra was the weeping widow, but the wedding that started it all featured a baker who just wanted a favor. Our next guest was a master of dialects who brought a touch of sweetness to the saga, a man whose face you know even if you can't place the name. Vito Scotti bustled into the wedding reception in 1972 as Nazarene the baker when he was 54 years old, a master of 1,000 faces whose request for a favor masked the grinding reality of Hollywood's most tireless chameleon. Scotti was the definition of a working actor, a man who played everything from Mexican bandits to Japanese sailors, yet for his memorable turn as the baker asking the Don for help, he was paid a standard Screen Actors Guild day player rate, likely netting him less than $1,000 for his time on set. It was a pittance for a man whose face was instantly engaging, but Scotti never chased the millions. He chased the work, accumulating over 200 credits in a career defined by volume rather than value. He was a beloved figure who lived comfortably but modestly, leaving an estate estimated at $1.5 million built dollar by dollar through decades of supporting roles. However, the tragedy of Vito Scotti was that the man of many voices was silenced by the one thing he couldn't mimic his way out of. He passed away on June 5, 1996, at the age of 78 from lung cancer, a quiet and painful end for a man who had spent his life bringing joy and texture to the backgrounds of our favorite stories. Fun fact: Scotti was so convincing in his ethnic roles that many producers refused to believe he was actually an Italian-American from San Francisco, often hiring him to play foreign parts while rejecting him for Italian roles. It's bittersweet looking back at the cast of The Godfather. Though time has passed and some stars have left us, their legacy remains timeless on screen. Which story shocked or touched you the most? Let us know in the comments below. Please like and subscribe to help us keep these memories alive. Thanks for watching.